Hello and welcome to another edition of What Does the Giraffe Say Media with me, Kathleen Ritorne. We're an organisation that aims to connect people with conservation efforts around the world by holding live interviews on social media. Today we're going to be talking all things snakes, and we're going to be talking with Hiral Naik, and she works for Save the Snakes. So Hiral, if I could just hand over to you, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got so passionate about snakes.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me here, Kathleen. I'm Hiral Naik. I am a PhD student in South Africa, currently working on venomous snakes and how that relates to snakebite. I also work for Save the Snakes, a nonprofit organization, and we do education and conservation work. And for me, I was born and grew up in Zimbabwe. And since I was a young child, I was always very curious about the natural world. And so, I just became fascinated with all things wild and wonderful. And it wasn't until, I guess I always had a passion for reptiles. I always thought they were really cool, not necessarily pursuing them as a career, but it was very exciting. And when I got to university, I got to learn about them in a very scientific way. So from an evolutionary point of view, I absolutely find them fascinating. They're one of the very few animals that are able to adapt to so many different environments and just pick up all these different traits that allow them to thrive in these different environments. And learning about them is just absolutely fascinating.
And were people surprised when this was something that you wanted to follow for your passion? I mean, snakes typically they do get a bit of a bad rep. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we're going forward. But also just being a female as well, most people think, I don't. I think snakes are very cool. I was brought up with them as a child as well. So I absolutely think they're amazing. But I guess for people looking at a traditional kind of thing, it is a little bit different.
Yeah. I think my family was most surprised when I chose to study them as a career, and they always questioned it. But I think, I've always had this kind of strong personality type, and I always kind of conquered through. And I think a lot of people never really questioned why I chose to work with snakes. And so I think a lot more people gradually accepted what I do. And I think now a lot of friends, people I've met along the way over the years, they all support the kind of work I do. And it's such a special feeling.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier that you're working for Save the Snakes. So for those who are watching back home and they're not really aware of the organization, can you tell us a little bit about the organization itself and your role within that?
Sure. So Save the Snakes is a nonprofit organization based in the United States, but our work is global. How we operate is we have conservation partners around the world that work to mitigate human-snake conflict and educate people about why snakes are important. I've been with Save the Snakes for about 3 years, but it wasn't until last year that I decided to start a project in South Africa, where I'm currently based. And so I became the Africa program manager, and now I work in South Africa on various education and outreach projects. And through this, also be able to support some of our other partners based in Africa.
And we talked about it as we started the show. Snakes are often persecuted and feared. Kind of why is this, and how do you combat that with the work that you're doing?
So it's very common to find people that absolutely hate snakes, and we find that it's really just years and years of sharing myths that are completely false, and this translates from generation to generation, and often when we ask kids why are they scared of snakes, it's something that their parents have told them and their parents told them. So the only way that we can dispel a lot of myths and really mitigate fear is by educating people, working very closely with them. Our education specifically entails, interaction with non-venomous snakes, and being able to see a transition, because often we'll bring out a non-venomous snake, and a lot of the learners are very afraid, but they see some of their peers that are touching the snake, and after a while they slowly warm up to it, and we found this so effective. And really, we find that our education really goes a long way, because at the end of the day, I think that's the only way we are really going to be able to make any kind of difference.
And obviously, you're based in South Africa, and there's many, many different kinds of snakes. Some are venomous, some are not. And some people just kind of tar every single snake under the same brush. I know when I was living in Zambia, we had a snake on the property and everybody wanted to kill it, and we managed to just remove it, and take it to a safer place away from where humans are. Is that kind of some of the work that you're doing as well?
Yes. So we really try to highlight what kind of, for example, differentiating between non-venomous and venomous snakes, understanding how to react in the situation. So our education also focuses on live demonstration with venomous snakes. We have a trained handler that works with the snakes and shows the behavior of these different snakes to the learners, so they're able to see that venomous snakes also, their main objective is really to go off on their own, go find food, go find shelter. They don't really want to harm humans.
I think that's a very common misconception. Actually, funnily enough, I saw a post from one of my friends who works in conservation today, and he's doing a snake handling course himself today, and he's saying that snakes aren't aggressive, they're defensive. Yes. So it's not that they're going to seek a human and be like, okay, I'm going to attack that human. It's a case of, you've invaded its space, and it's kind of frightened and defending itself. So then how do you train people then to try and ease this human snake conflict and be aware of, of the right protocols to get rid of the snake rather than just killing the snake?
That's a very good question. So the project that I mentioned that we're running in South Africa, it's in partnership with the Hoedspruit Reptile Center. So there's a reptile park here in Hoedspruit where I'm based, and that really acts as a hub for education. And it's the reason why our partnership between Save the Snakes and the Hoedspruit Reptile Center is so important, because it allows us to have this ongoing mentorship and education with the people that are in the community. So it's not just a once-off based education that we do. What we like to do is understand why people are afraid. If they're afraid, they come to the park. We work with them to try and mitigate that fear, and really help them to overcome, this fear that they don't even know how it really exists, and we find that, it's the learning aspect is absolutely great for them. They find them fascinating. So it's a psychological thing to be able to remove that fear. And for me personally, I think the only way to do that is actually to build relationships with people and partners, other organizations as well.
And we've got a question coming through from Winnie. Hi, Winnie. Always lovely to see her name popping up. She's a big supporter of the show, so thank you for tuning in. And she is asking, do you find children are more interested in learning about snakes rather than adults?
Interesting question. I'd say probably. So, for example, we work with different kids from different communities, and we really get a lot more fascinating questions and curious questions from kids than we do from adults. Adults have a very black and white perspective, whereas kids and children are far more malleable in the way that they think about things. So we're able to really influence them positively wherever we can.
And I guess as well, by doing that, not only are you inspiring the next generation, but also hopefully they're going home and speaking to their parents or their elders and saying, you know, this is actually the situation. What kind of common misconceptions do you hear? Are there any kind of myths and things like that that you have to constantly try and rebuke?
Yes, so we actually find different myths in different schools, different communities, and it's really fascinating because we really find it's specific to communities and cultures. But a lot of people obviously consider snakes a very bad omen. We really try to, tell them that this is completely untrue. Some people believe that snakes have their heart in their tails, and so they'll want to kind of chop off their tails. Then we hear a lot of interesting stories. Recently, on a visit to one of the schools, one of the teachers said that they in the mountains there lives a snake that sounds like a goat, and you know it's completely surprising because this is not true. For one, we had to explain to them that snakes don't have vocal cords the same way humans do. They produce a sound using their body. For example, something like the puff adder will puff its body to alert anybody around it that it's present in that location. But yeah, the goat story was really, really unusual.
I mean, I find that fascinating. I didn't realize, I guess I didn't really think about it too much, but the fact that they don't have these vocal cords, how do snakes then kind of communicate with each other? Do they communicate with each other?
So scent is a very important kind of means for them to move around. And of course, snakes largely do this with their tongues. So for those of you that don't know, and keep wondering why snakes stick their tongue in and out of their mouth, it's because they're trying to get a sense of the environment. Usually they'll take in the sense particles through their nostrils and then use their tongue to get a sense of what's inside the environment or outside in their environment. And then what they do is the brain, there's something called a Jacobson's organ. And that's how they're able to then recognize everything that's around them. So this is why, snakes move around, because they need to be able to detect everything that's in their environment.
I absolutely love that. As part of your project as well, you run a Women and Serpents project. Why are women so important to kind of bringing into the project? And have you seen a change in attitudes towards their vision of snakes?
So the Women and Serpents project is very important because most people see a lot of white men working with snakes, and this has been going on for generations and generations. And we want to be able to show that anybody can come and work with snakes, because it increases. It's all about learning about an animal. So if you have women working with mammals around the world, why not snakes? So it's very important to be able to do that. And again, working as a woman, with snakes, it's important to be able to show, be role models to other women and show them, especially young girls, be able to inspire them to pursue careers in herpetology, working with reptiles, whatever it is. It's really important to be able to allow them to feel like they don't necessarily have to be stuck in certain job roles. And some of the most fascinating experiences come when you are working as a woman in I guess in snake ecology. One time I went to go rescue a python with my team here in Hoedspruit, and so it was like a 2.5, 3 meter python, and some of the workers that were on the farm, they were completely surprised that I, as a woman, caught this python. And and it happens to my colleagues that are females working with python snakes as well. And to be able to, it takes, small steps like that to be able to get people to become far more familiar with women working with snakes. I think, there's no way of really changing the world than making these small changes and small steps along the way.
Absolutely agree. And I think it's such a vital part of your project. And it is kind of inspiring people that, women can do this role. And it doesn't have to be the kind of typical people that you do see going out doing these jobs. We have a question coming through from Nick, and he's from Portugal. She's from Portugal. And they are asking, the myth of snakes suckling milk from animals and humans is common in Portugal. Is it also a common myth in South Africa?
No, I won't say it's common, and at least not from my experience. I've also found that in different parts of Africa, we also have very different myths. And I think, I was telling my colleagues when we heard the goat story, that often it's simply rumors. One person thinks that they see a snake in a certain way, or they perceive it, something that's slithering and comes across an animal and it attacks it, or they make up the story in their head, and so they easily spread it. And of course, it's very easy to spread negative news of any sort, really.
I've got another question coming through from Don Gordon Pearson. He's on my personal page, so it's not showing up on this screen. Hi, Don. He's also a very good supporter. And he's asking, do you find some religions which have beliefs about snakes? For example, he's aware of one religion in parts of the US where the belief is that handling venomous snakes is proof of your faith. Do you have similar things like that?
So there are a few. I mean, I can't name any off the top of my head. It's very common in Asia. I will tell you one thing. So I grew up learning about Hinduism. My parents are Hindu, and so there is a god that has a cobra around him all the time, and so that has led people to consider cobras quite sacred. And so in different parts of India, they'll worship these snakes. And there are very similar stories across the world. In old Egyptian times, there's stories about how snakes were also considered quite sacred. But on the opposite side, there's also a lot of stories where snakes in religions were considered very negative. And I think, it all comes down to the way this information has been spread across the world, and how we understand that. And something that we try to do is we don't go with the approach of education where we just tell people that this is the truth. We try to work with them so that we understand where their faith has come from, where this idea of snakes being bad or snakes being good comes from, and it really allows people to open up a lot more about their stories. And if it's a fear, then we certainly try to work with them to try and see how they can better understand snakes within their context.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important what you were just saying there. You don't want to be undermining people's religious beliefs and things like that. You have to respect what their beliefs are, but at the same time, bring it into a way of also educating about the realities of snakes as well. And I guess kind of following a little bit on from that, a lot of people don't realize why snakes are so important and why they're vital to ecosystems. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about this and why they are vital to different ecosystems?
Sure. So, I mean, most of you have probably seen rats and mice roaming around homes and all kinds of buildings. And, we consider rats and mice a pest. And snakes are natural pest controls. And so, often when you find a snake inside your house, it's very likely coming so that it can eat those rats and mice. And we also know that rats and mice spread diseases. So, for example, on different farms, snakes are there trying to mitigate the spread of diseases by eating the rats and mice. And so they bring this important balance to the ecosystem. Snakes are also, not only predators, but they are also food items to like big birds of prey, other mammals, even other snakes. And so it's important to understand that kind of placement. And another very, very important thing that snakes do is the venom from different snakes is used to develop different drugs to treat different, things like cancer, pain of sorts, blood pressure, and different, just to break it down, what a lot of these healthcare professionals will do is they'll extract certain components from the venom and then use that to be able to create a relevant drug in that situation.
That kind of feeds in quite nicely with my next question, because I know you're doing a PhD in behavioural ecology of venomous snakes in South Africa and snake bites. Can you discuss a little bit about this, what your findings are, and how to mitigate human-snake conflict?
Sure. So I'm still in my first year of my PhD, but I'll tell you why this is important. So in 2017, snakebite was declared a neglected tropical disease by the World Health Organization because it really affects millions of people around the world. Between 81,000 to 138,000 people die in some of these really rural tropical areas. So what that, and it's, this is something that's completely preventable. So my research specifically focuses on understanding the behavior of venomous snakes, kind of their distribution, what are their daily activities, how they're kind of striking, and be able to understand what kind of circumstances lead to biting situations. And this obviously requires working closely with hospitals and healthcare professionals, as well as something I'm interested in is the relationship between snakes and farmers. And like you said, with the human-snake conflict, that's quite an important question because I really want to be able to understand what, are snakes kind of preying on any of these livestock in a situation? Are farmers killing snakes? Is there more of a positive response? All these different aspects will essentially allow me to be able to contribute to preventing snakebite, and then obviously be able to share that with countries that don't necessarily have the means to combat it, and then being able to kind of work with people around the world to try and mitigate snakebite in these vulnerable regions.
And if people are watching back home and thinking, okay, that sounds like quite an interesting job, how would they go about doing something like that? And what kind of training do you need to have to be able to go out and catch these snakes? Because obviously you don't want someone who doesn't understand snakes and their kind of behavior to just go and grab a snake. They need to have the professionals in. So kind of talk us a little bit about how you got into the snake stuff in the first place, and then also how the training works itself.
Right. So, a lot of people become snake enthusiasts by keeping different snakes, and it's good as long as you learn about which snakes are okay to keep, how to handle them. I obviously come from a research background. So for me, I did a bachelor's in science and got interested. So I, went on to pursue a master's, and that's how I'm doing my PhD now. But, there's a research aspect, but there's also, that training that you need when you work with these actual snakes. And that's where, working with people that are, professional snake trainers and snake handlers is important. So at the Hoedspruit Reptile Center, my colleague here, Christopher Cook, he trains people, and it's very important. The kind of training we do really allows people to understand the behavior of snakes, prepares them to go and, rescue snakes on their own. Save the Snakes itself, based in Sacramento, California. They do, or our team in Sacramento does venomous snake training there as well. And it comes from, me being able to train myself up and then being able to teach others as well. And that's essentially how we, make progress. And that's why it's important that we also do the training right. We don't do it from the perspective of just training people. We want people to be able to understand how to handle a venomous snake, in a situation or any kind of situation. Because I will tell you that every snake rescue situation is always going to be different. And so having the knowledge, the right knowledge to be able to set yourself up in the situation to rescue a snake is very, very important.
And have you had any moments when you are doing your snake rescues where you thought, oh, that was a bit close for comfort?
Thank goodness, nothing so far. But an important thing about that is that when you go, rescue a snake, you have to be very focused. It's just you and the snake. Your training comes into play, and you learn exactly what kind of movements to watch out for. And when you do it right, your odds of being bitten are very low.
We got a question coming through from Jennifer Palmer. Hi, Jennifer. And she's asking, what would you recommend someone do if they are bitten by snakes? She's saying that they have rattlesnakes here in San Diego.
So that's a very good question. So what we recommend is, first and foremost, calling a hospital to make sure, first find out how close it is, and it needs to be your closest hospital. And also, if they have antivenom. So if you're, bitten by something like a rattlesnake, you will very likely need antivenom. And so it's important to be able to make sure that someone knows someone's coming, either to you or you have a means of getting to the hospital. Secondly, you try not to move your limbs. So wherever you have been bitten, try not to move that area of the body too much. It's also important to stay calm. And then, the best thing to do is, like I say, go to the hospital, because the healthcare professionals there should be able to treat you with your symptoms and be able to help you out.
And what about if you wasn't sure what snake it was? Say you're not an expert in snakes, you've just been bitten, but you have no idea what it is. What would you kind of advise in that sort of situation?
So, there's, I will say that around the world, there's a lot of ways of doing it, but I will tell you what we recommend. Healthcare professionals treat symptoms. So, they will automatically know, for example, if you've been bitten by a cytotoxic snake, you will have necrosis on your skin, and they will very likely know that was probably from a cytotoxic snake. In situations where, so one thing we don't recommend is people going to go and pick up the snake, because, even if you've killed the snake, for one thing, if people don't know, snakes still have venom in their fangs, and they can still, envenomate you if you play around with the fangs, or if it kind of hits you in any way. So don't go and touch the snake, because if you don't know what the snake is, you'd rather be safe and just go to the hospital immediately. Otherwise, if you have a good enough distance from the snake and you can take a photo, that can be helpful as well.
We've got a question coming through from Abel, and they're asking, can you touch on about snake repellents and the fact that there is no such?
So as you said, there are no snake repellents. And, we often have a lot of myths spreading about this as well. One interesting story we have here is that people think that if you put garlic on your kind of fence, it's going to deter the snake. No, that is not going to work. There's simply no real way of repelling snakes. One thing we do recommend is that if you are living in a house where you have a lot of boxes and lots, if you've got a big pile of items that you're not necessarily using, so it's a perfect spot for snakes to hide. And again, if it's not necessarily clean, there's probably going to be rats and mice, and so the snake is likely to come, regardless of what you want to do to try and prevent the snake from coming.
So you heard it here. There are no such thing as snake repellent. So it's best to just kind of declutter and do the best that you can. So talking a bit more about the work that you're doing with the local communities and the women and all that kind of thing on the education, empowering and that kind of stuff. It's all incredible stuff. How can people support the work that you're doing?
So our project is on Save the Snakes and on our Save the Snakes website. So you can donate, funds to our project. If you're also interested in, funding specific things, you're more than welcome to email me. We're always looking for, handling equipment. What we want to be able to do is train local people or local individuals within each community so that they become these snake champions, and so they will be working with their own community rather than us having to go to each community. And that way we're going to be empowering the community members, really being able for them to share their own stories about why it's important to save snakes. And so we've got, we always need equipment for things like handling, for our presentations, because something that we also obviously do is a lot of these local rural communities don't necessarily have projectors or any kind of technology. So we want to be able to print out these big posters that we can share with them. It's all these little costs that do end up, building up. So if you would like to support our project, feel free to email me, visit us, our website at Save the Snakes. Hopefully we can, you can learn more about the kind of things we do.
And I guess as well, by empowering the local community, they're able to then spread the message in their local language, which is easier for the communities to understand. And also they'll be seen as someone with a lot more kind of respect and authority because it's someone that they know and it's someone that's coming in rather than an outsider. So I think it's such incredible work that you're doing. And I really, really appreciate all the stuff that you're doing. So I've only got one more question left and then we'll start to wrap up. But if you are watching back home and you would like to put a question towards us, then please do. Just pop it in the comments section and I will read it out for you. If you're watching this and it's not live, then please do feel free to pop it in the comments section and one of us will get back to you and try and answer that question for you. So I'm wondering, Hiral, what your favorite success story is?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I won't say I have a favorite. One of the things I absolutely love about the kind of work that we do is that each situation always feels like a success. Every school we visit, we really feel like we've made some kind of impact. Whether they'd had no knowledge of snakes beforehand or they did know about them, our kind of model works in a way where we choose to engage with people, so it's something that's going to last for as long as possible. And it's fantastic. About a couple of weeks ago, we went to the school and there was a little girl that, we always find that a lot of the girls, a lot of the learners, they're very shy in the beginning. But after a while, they start to warm up and then they start asking questions. And, there's a good question and answer session, and we love it because we really get an idea of what these learners are thinking, how they feel about snakes, and then being able to, I guess, share with them what, a lot of the people in my generation never did as kids. I mean, I would have loved to have had someone come to talk to me about snakes when I was in school. And, to give them the opportunity to learn about snakes and feel like, one day they could be doing this as well. I think that in itself is a success story.
I completely agree. We've got another question coming through from Danik, and they're asking, sometimes people in South Africa are bitten in bed while sleeping. Apparently the Mozambique spitting cobra is responsible for more bites in these circumstances. Is this true? If so, why? And any specific behavior that makes this possible?
So that is a very important question that I am answering for my PhD. So message me in about a year and a half, 2 years, and I will have the answers for you.
So are you finding that there are certain snakes that are causing specific problems in different areas?
So the sleeping one, specifically to the Mozambique spitting cobra, so we don't actually know why. It's we don't have any other snake in Africa, at least, that does that. I could be wrong. There could be a few others in other parts of Africa. But in Asia, there are examples of banded kraits and also cobras that bite people. Often this is because people sleep on the floor. But what specifically, attracts them to people? Is it simply because, they are perceived as a prey item? It could be that. It's a fascinating question, and it's something I really look forward to learning more about.
So it's a case of watch this space, and hopefully hopefully we'll get a response soon. We've got another question coming through from Darren Coombs. Hi, Darren, another supporter of the show, so always lovely to see your name too. And he is asking, what snake is your favourite and why?
It's always a tough one. Truth be told, I don't have a favorite snake. I think each one has such a special aspect about them. I will tell you though that so I really like gaboon vipers, gaboon adders. They are really, really special animals, special snakes. A snake that I recently started working with quite a lot and have grown to absolutely love is actually the boomslang. So boomslang, for those of you that don't know, is tree snake, and they're very docile, snakes that are often found in trees, hidden away, but they really are such great snakes to be able to work with. And it's one of the snakes that people have such a bad kind of idea of, and to be able to show that these snakes are actually quite remarkable, and choose to just stay in the tree given the choice, is really important.
They're absolutely beautiful as well, I find, like to visually look at. I think they're stunning. Okay, so we've got one more question coming through, and that's from Akash, and they are asking, how do you work with those people who knows about snakes but still kill them by thinking they are bad? He means this in some thinking a religious way. They are a bad sign. It becomes hard to make them understand.
Yeah. So again, it's a tough one, and it really comes down to the education. Through our education work, we do surveys to understand people's behaviors. And in one of the rural schools that we visited, there was a good kind of perception of snakes. People were quite positive when they liked the idea of snakes, but in that same situation, they were a lot more likely to kill snakes than any other situation. And this is very likely because, their parents have taught them that, you see a snake, you kill it, regardless of what you think about it. And so it's important that we educate them that, snakes shouldn't be killed. snakes are important for our ecosystem. And again, it comes down to how they understand snakes, and how they feel around snakes. As you know, the moment they understand that, snakes, for example, like big cats and elephants and rhinos, are part of the ecosystem that we live in, their perception really does change, because they understand that, okay, it's just another animal that deserves to be in our environment.
I couldn't agree with you more. Okay, so I've got last question that we'll take now, and then we'll start to wrap up. There's one more from Darren, and he's asking, do you think that the TV show Snakes in the City helps people to understand snakes in SA?
So I have my own, obviously, thoughts about a TV show like that. But it's important to understand that TV shows like that often are trying to make a show. So they will very likely put snakes in situations where they have to go rescue them. And that's why I think it's important to get your information from the right sources, to be able to, speak to people that are professionals, that come from, scientific backgrounds, people that have experience in this field for a really long time, and to actually watch shows that actually portray snakes more realistically. It's not always about going out and chasing snakes in different situations. And there's obviously various different programs that kind of show this thrill about chasing a snake in different situations. And what we try to move away from that, because instead it's important to watch videos or watch TV shows about people actually going and making an impact in communities, because it's not necessarily about me as a conservationist. It's about the community. It's about the people that are learning to understand what snakes are, how they're important in the environment. And I think the moment we start portraying those people in the limelight, understanding why they are important, within the world today, is the moment that we will start moving in a better direction with regards to conservation.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's all too easy to kind of dramatize things, and also kind of in a way keep villainizing these snakes rather than working on the human snake conflict side. Hiral, I've absolutely loved having you on. It's been so fascinating. I myself have learned so much. Your passion is clearly showing through, and we've had so much lovely feedback as we've been talking. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we say goodbye?
No, to all the viewers, thanks for watching. Go learn a little bit about your local snakes, and please always share your stories. We love listening and hearing about snake stories. And thank you so much for having me on the show, Kathleen.
Absolutely no problems. Thank you everyone back home for watching. We always love seeing your names popping up and the people supporting. Really appreciate it. If you have enjoyed it, please give it a cheeky little like, comment or share. The more people that see it, the more awareness we can raise, and the more people can become aware of the work that people are doing for conservation. And please do keep in tune with the show. We've got some fantastic guests coming on over the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for our future guests. Hiral, as I said, I've absolutely loved having you on. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for everyone for joining in, and enjoy the rest of your day.